everyone. Welcome back to today's podcast. Let's talk about deconstruction, which I'm sure you've heard in reference to politics. We talk about deconstructing the system, but today you are the system, especially if you're neurodivergent. I find on my own personal journey that deconstruction was one of the major tools that I needed to figure out who I am, my why, and my place in the universe. So when we talk about deconstruction, we're talking about taking something apart, not to destroy it necessarily, but to actually understand it in great detail. So I want you to imagine yourself as the object of the deconstruction so we can learn the very details of what makes you, you. Depending on the bubble you're in, some people think they're their brain. They think they're their soul, their consciousness. They think there's a core or not a core to a person. Some people feel like we're just evolved animals and we're sort of these biological creatures. I'm more on that side of things. But also, I think within that reality, that biological reality, there's also sort of a, let's call it spiritual component, which I think can be a little bit of a triggering word for some bubbles, but a sort of spiritual relationship to the consciousness element that I like to incorporate into my belief system, which is it's a belief system. So it's not necessarily something I know for a fact, but it is something that I believe that coincides with the scientific understanding of what it means to be a person. And I understand there are religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs. There's all kinds of people who exist on the planet. So first you got to figure out which kind are you? What category do you fall into? And then you get to start picking that person apart in the best way possible, not to demean or talk ill of yourself, but to figure out you. Now, in this process, you will figure out the things you love about yourself and the things you definitely want to change. And that's also a part of the process of deconstructing, is to figure out what needs to change to be a more joyful and better self. So again, if you relate this back to politics and the system, think about deconstructing the system that obviously isn't working for everybody, but could, if we deconstructed it, we could find those things that weren't working, make them better, and therefore the results would be better for everybody. You're going to do that for yourself. One of the things I'm going to give you today is a tool that I actually utilize in my calls. And since my calls are coming to an end, some of the tools that I would give callers are no longer going to be accessible to people one-on-one. So I just thought I would give you one of my favorite tools today. For you guys, it is something I created for myself. It's definitely not scientifically backed. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a person who created a little bit of a philosophy system. And I use this tool to sort of understand myself in relation to introspection and self-awareness. So what I'm going to do is, usually if we were doing a one-on-one call, I would ask you to imagine one of three places. And if you've done calls with me, you probably know what's coming. But I would have asked you to pick an environment, and I would have asked you to pick outer space, the ocean, or a forest. For the sake of this, we're going to talk about the forest setting. I think it's easiest to digest. So imagine that you're you and you're in a forest in the clothing you're in. It's about midday. What do you do first? You're not sure where you are. You don't know how far civilization is. You don't have any tech stuff on you. You just have you. Do you look for shelter? Do you climb a tree and stay there? Do you scream for help? Do you walk until you can't walk anymore? Do you attempt to survive in the forest? Do you attempt to find civilization? What do you do? One time I had a caller who kind of years ago became sort of an infamous reference to the unique ways people could answer this question. He was an interesting person, came from a pretty privileged background, and was struggling with sort of his why. His parents kind of gave him a lot of access to things and he didn't know what to do next. And I can understand that perspective. Sometimes it's really hard when you're given everything to know what to do with it. So we did the exercise and he picked a forest and he climbed into a tree and he decided to stay there. And I asked him what would he do if like a couple of days had gone by, and he said, "Oh, I'd stay there." And I said, "Why?" And, we kind of talked about his fear. I only ever talked to him once, so I don't know where he is now. I hope he's doing well. But it was, a conversation about a fear of if he did anything, it could be the wrong thing. So you might as well do nothing. And that's a very interesting thing to know about yourself. So the point of the exercise for me when I created it was to ask myself, what would I do if I was just me? Because sometimes in life, a lot of times in life, let's be real, we are slave to the script, slave to the bubble. We're confused about who we are because we're always asking ourselves how other people see us and how we should live our lives because of how they see us. But what if you're just a person who's trying to figure out who you are, regardless of the input from society? So you're there in that forest and you've made your decision about what to do. And as the sun is setting, what do you do next? next? Do you make camp? And how would you make camp? What would that look like? The idea is like you're supposed to ask yourself enough, and this would be easier, obviously, if you're with me and I could ask you questions. I've never actually tried to do this exercise without a person in front of me. So the idea is like, depending on your answers, there would be a follow-up question. And you're going to ask yourself as many questions as possible until you've really understood the self as many times as you need to do this exercise. Think of it like a spider web that's clumped together, and you know there's independent strands that made this clump, and we're going to delicately pull ourselves apart to find the core of that spider web, right? Same thing with this exercise. When the sun comes up the next day, what do? The idea is to ask yourself, who would you be if there was nobody else, but not who would you be if there was no one else ever, because obviously you exist because you had people who birthed you. The idea is, who would you be as you are if no one else was giving you constant input about that person? And then to deconstruct all of these things that we've curated around us to explain ourselves. Another way to look at it is you could think of a painting. And this is personally what I do is when I meet a new person, I paint a painting of them in my head. And as they talk, I add things to the painting. So if my friend was talking to me and they're like, I really love tennis, I'd start drawing them with like tennis balls or something. And I'd say, oh, my friend loves tennis. And then if the next week they were like, oh, I hate tennis now, I'd like take tennis out of the painting. Imagery is really important for me personally. So the way that I remember details about people is sort of the imagery that I create around them. So anytime they update me, anytime they tell me something new, I update the painting based off of that thing. And that's how I kind of grow a picture of somebody. It's how I grow a picture of myself. What do I look like? If I was an art piece, what kind of art piece would I be? If I was a piece of music, what kind of piece of music would I be? And then but explore more with the self. What does that mean? Should I keep it there? Should I get rid of it? Does it belong there? You know, when we talk about orientation or gender, which I think a part of it is a biological experience and a construct around that biological experience. And when I think about myself as a queer person, as a person who questions gender, as a person who questions what it means to exist, all I have to do is remind myself that I am first a living being, having a lived experience, and that's a valid experience. But the fluidity of that experience begs the question about the binary way we examine the self. And so I can deconstruct religion, gender, money, society. I can look at society and say, I know my own personal experience is incredibly fluid. So why wouldn't all of society's relationship with self be fluid? And we know it has been over all of these years, all of these civilizations, all of these things. We know there's a fluidity to humanity. But at the same time, the rigidity, the binary allows us to have a perceived sort of stability that allows us to do the next step, which is kind of true of the self as well. When you're deconstructing and reconstructing the self, you want to get to a place of stability so you can make the next step. The problem is I think without the curiosity and the willingness to take that jump, that leap of faith, it can cause you to want stability over growth. And so your stability now becomes stagnation, which I think we see in a lot of parts of society. There's a huge part of society that's just so afraid of destabilizing the stability of what they've grown that they refuse to engage in deconstructing. And so they won't be able to grow. They'll remain stagnant, probably bigoted, right? Closed-minded. So your goal as a person who's deconstructing the self is to be open-minded and curious and to seek out stability. It's not to go chaotic. It's not to destroy everything in hopes that that will make sense. There has to be sense in the chaos. And I think a lot of us forget that the whole point of learning more about the self is to, take it apart, to build it to be stronger than it was before, not worse off than it was before. That's why when we talk about deconstructing in terms of society, people are really worried because they're saying, well, where will we be if we deconstruct? Well, hopefully in a better place. But you also have to have that building mindset in order to actually go into deconstruction, I think, in a wise way. So we want to be wise about our deconstruction. We don't want to just burn it all to the ground and be like, who am I? Quit my job, quit my life, quit my relationships. We want to take them apart slowly and methodically and with wisdom. And if you're like me and you feel like you're still on your wisdom journey and you feel like, gosh, I'm not even wise yet, that's okay, because I think a part of deconstruction is earning wisdom. So hopefully this will give you another tool towards that sort of idea. But you want to have wisdom in mind. You want to be in your wise mind. For my DBT people, you want to be somebody who's grounded in the way you learn about yourself. And, we all go through messy periods. So if you're in a messy period yourself, that's okay. Sometimes that messy period also just needs to be deconstructed. I mean, that's really what we're doing here. We're taking a tool and we're looking at our life, especially when it's out of order, and we're putting things where they belong. And when we put things where they belong, I think things fall into place and they make sense again. So, throughout your life, you'll meditate, deconstruct, reconstruct, seek out stability, be open and curious. And these are tools that will be with you for the rest of your life. It's not like you do it once and that's it, though, of course you could. And that's where my levels come into play. When we look at the levels, lots of people deconstruct just enough to gain the stability to remain stagnant, which is in all ways very fine. If you zoom out into the macro, all human beings are on their own individual journey. Stagnation isn't what I would recommend, but all of society has done pretty well with pockets of the population remaining stagnant. But remember, the society moved forward not because of stagnation. And so for all of those who are willing to dream and willing to do the unthinkable, now we have what we have now. So if you in your own life want to be that person who dreams the dream and does the unthinkable, that's what deconstructing the self gets you. It gets you an opportunity to move out of stagnation and into something that other people around you might not understand, right? It's kind of like if you've ever been in the finance bubbles. Finance is very personal. It's very hard for people. And you might be, the guy who saves. You never go out to the bar. Your friends are like, oh, why don't you come out and drink with us? They're spending $50, $40 a night drinking. And you're the friend who never goes out. It's kind of like daring to be the guy who actually puts that money into savings and doesn't spend it versus the friends who think, well, we're living minimum wage anyways. You might as well spend all your money. I get it, right? I've been there. I've been that friend who was like, let's just spend all our money and enjoy our life because you never know if there's tomorrow until you start realizing oh God, there's going to be tomorrow and the next day and the next day. I better prepare for that. And being a person who prepares is sort of that's a unique position to be in. So you might feel alienated from your friends or family, but that's okay. That's their journey. And that's why I say the reason I put you in a forest, the reason I ask you who would you be if you didn't have the input from others is because even though the people in our life are wonderful and we love them, sometimes they're on a journey of their own that could encourage you to be worse off.
Since deconstructing and really deconverting, I didn't just deconstruct, I deconverted. I'm not a Christian anymore.
Today, we want to talk about the hot topic in the Christian space right now, which is deconstruction.
I was really just trying to be honest about the fact that all the ways that I had defined faith and Christianity, that I was no longer choosing to live according to those.
I didn't know about that until I went through a process of deconstruction. And I'm like, wait, you're telling me there's stuff in the Bible that wasn't originally in the Bible?
And if you're ready to be a different kind of person, that means you have to change in a way that might feel offensive or threatening to them, but that's just a human experience, right? I think what's important is that you remind everybody that it's not about them, it's about yourself. Or maybe you remind yourself it's not about them, it's about you, but you wish for them to also be joyful in their life. But this is where you get to really focus on you. Who am I in the story? What am I in the story? And how do I make it through life knowing these things about myself? And how do I relate to others? So the other part of this that I think is really important is it gives you a tool to understand yourself in your bubble, the bubble you live in or create, and the bubbles that you interact with. So for myself as an example, deconstructed my queerness, my ideas around gender, partners. I'm sure for all of us who are bisexual, pansexual, we've gone through a stage of feeling less than worthy of being queer in some aspects because of the gender of our partners or the way we seek out intimacy without understanding that once you deconstruct gender, what really is a relationship except a love for the consciousness, regardless of gender? And I know for some binary LGBT folks, that's a really scary concept, but I'm more on the LGBT spectrum of gender deconstruction, which means that ultimately the partners that I'm with, the people that I'm with, gender aside, it's the consciousness at the core. And that gives the freedom to myself and my partners to have my partner, I only have one partner, but an ability to explore whatever it means to be them throughout the longevity of our life and our relationship without the construct and binary of whatever that preconceived notion is that everybody has in their head. Now, of course, regardless of how we feel in our own bubble, we're still dealing with the world. And so you have to act accordingly. We have to build a community. I believe in society. We have to be good to society. And so we make an effort to make sure that we're all compromising together. I always say in my relationship, we don't compromise on values, just who does the dishes. In society, sometimes we try not to compromise on values, But in the detail of how society works, some of us do have to compromise in some ways, and we do that to the best of our ability. And ultimately, the top value should be freedom, expression, an ability to live, have, a good, healthy family. All of those values should take precedent over all of the details around us. So maybe you're religious and you're anti-LGBT, but what trumps your religious anti-LGBT is the fact that you think like Americans should be free and people should be free in their countries, wherever they are, right? So the idea is, as a society, we compromise on those values and we should be reaching for greater societal values. And then in the details of your own privacy of your home, you can raise your family, have your family the way you want, your values, whatever that means, right? Let's say you're a vegan and it makes sense for you to preach veganism to people and hope people, reduce harm and all of that. That's great. But asking all of society to do that at the pace you're going might be unfair. So maybe at home, you live by example. You're vegan at home and why are you vegan, right? It's all about asking yourself, who are you and how does that relate to society? And how do you learn to compromise with the greater world? Because there's 8 billion people and we all have our own traumas and beliefs and cultures and differences. And we can't expect people to just keep up with our journey. So how do you make peace with the fact that everyone's at their own pace, going their own pace on their own journey? And then how do you accept that you yourself you're going your own pace on your own journey? You deconstruct. You sit with yourself and you pull yourself apart as many times as it takes for the rest of your life. As long as you're it's coinciding with your joy, deconstruction will always feel like an improvement. If you're out of sync with your joy, deconstruction might feel scary because you're taking something away that you've built, like that stability I mentioned a few minutes ago. But that's why we have to make sure that we are aiming for our joy, that right now is the right time to deconstruct because I'm outside of survival mode, or maybe I need to deconstruct in order to survive survival mode. It just depends on your journey. So for me personally, I really struggled to figure out my why until I deconstructed. So I was really bad with money. I was really bad at stability. I was a pretty good worker, but I burnt out every couple of years, especially realizing now that I'm late diagnosed autistic. It makes so much sense why working was so difficult in so many ways, because I had to, without my knowledge, manage my spoons and burnout against an industry that required me to work 12 to 15 hours a day. And that was just the average. Like, especially if you work in childcare, if you guys are nannies, I worked as a nanny and I worked on YouTube part-time. Nanny hours are about 12-hour shifts because you have to get there before the parents go to work and after they get off their shift. So you are working more than a person's regular shift, right? And then I would come home from working my 12-hour nanny shift and I would work 4 to 5 hours on YouTube, and then I would sleep, and then I would do it all over again until YouTube became my full-time job. And now that it is, it's really great. But now I run into the same problem with better bonuses in some ways. It's not guaranteed pay. That's one of the things about YouTube that's very different. Is like when I clock in, I might work for $2 an hour or $0 an hour in hopes to make money. As a nanny, I was guaranteed income, benefits, vacation, all of that stuff. But the good thing with YouTube is that I can take a day off and take that pay cut, but know that I can always come back tomorrow and no one can fire me. Like, no one can fire me from my job, but no one will also just pay me automatically either. But you play the game of pros and cons with your life. I could have gone into nannying. I could have opened up a house, a daycare. I could have made a lot of money nannying. But I think ultimately I probably would have burnt out. And I think childcare is so important of an industry that I would have wanted to be 110% my best. And now that I'm also chronically ill, diagnosed fibromyalgia in 2023, now I have this new relationship with my body I didn't have before. So I have to go back and deconstruct this version of Brittany that I had created and update her to be this version with limitations I didn't have before. Still working my 12 hours, my 8 hours, my 12 hours, whatever it is a day, but it's not going to be the same guarantee, but you're going to hope for the possibility. Fingers crossed. That's a lot of fingers crossed when you're realizing who you are and how you relate to the bubbles. So again, none of this is meant to overwhelm you, but it probably will for a time. It's actually meant to relieve you that all of the things that you feel like are so much about the world, it's really so much about yourself. All of us have to go to work and figure out how to pay our bills. All of us have to figure out how to get health insurance. All of us, unless we're wealthy, and I am certainly not, you are not. Okay, we're not dealing with the wealthy here. We're dealing with people who have to go to work. And if you have to go to work, then you have to know who you are and how you're going to relate to those bubbles. If you're the kind of person who is at home, like a stay-at-home partner, you're still going into a relationship with your environment, right? It's no, you don't just get to do what you want every day, even though I get to do what I want every day. We don't get to do what we want every day. We still have to feed ourselves. And so there's a relationship with deconstruction that comes in that allows you to see what is realistic for your goals and what isn't realistic for your goals, because ultimately there has to be a reasonable sacrifice. And deconstruction allows you to notice what is reasonable sacrifice and what is unnecessary suffering. There's so much unnecessary suffering. I especially did in my 20s. I did so much just unnecessary suffering, I think, because I didn't know my direction. And until I deconstructed myself, I didn't know that direction. And it took me a long time, right? During the longest period of deconstruction, my income went down to like $1,200 to $1,500 a month. And I tried to figure that out. I was living with my brother. I was able to work for him for a room and board, you know, because I didn't want to take advantage of anyone, of course. And I was able to sort of make do, pay my bills. I had like a trailer bill, a car bill, an insurance bill, stuff like that. You know, so all of my bills were being paid off that $1,200. But after that deconstruction period, I was able to do this basically. When I was done with my biggest deconstruction period, it lasted, I would say, when I was aware of it to when it ended, a couple years. It was a very large, maybe 3 years of a very large deconstruction period where I was like, if I don't figure this out, I'm not going to make it. I figured it out and now it led me here, but that doesn't mean I stopped deconstructing. Just because I got the dream job and I managed it and I learned how to work with it doesn't mean that the rest of the stuff in my life isn't also existing. It doesn't mean that I'm not also adapting my way of being a YouTuber or being a public figure. I mean, we just went over Johnny Depp and Amber Heard all over again on stream. And that took a lot of, okay, we have to deconstruct our misogyny. We have to look at how we first looked at this case. We have to realize like who we are. Why did we come to these opinions? How were we swayed by media? That is just a constant reminder of how much work we all have to do to be introspective and self-aware. So as much as we want to pat ourselves on the back and be like, I'm so self-aware, at the end of the day, you're still having a biological experience that will blind you. And that's why stagnation occurs, or at least people get comfortable in their bubbles, because it is a lot of work. It's like a full-time other job. And who has time for that when you got to pay your bills? And I'm lucky that it's a part of my special interest, that it gives me spoons to deconstruct at the end of the day. I'm lucky that my little, you know, the thing that I love the most is the thing that I turned into a philosophy. I made up rules for myself. I gave myself a script that worked from my brain and who I am. So maybe my tools don't work for you, but if you're in my neurodivergent category, then this might help you to deconstruct the self. And when you put yourself back together again, you know, if you want to think of yourself as a machine, just remember that it's a part of being the creator, like in a way, like you are the artist. Somebody, who was it? I recently saw somebody throw it around as an insult, but they called somebody like Frankenstein, like, oh my God, you're such a Frankenstein. And if you read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, one of my favorite books of all time, top 10 for sure, Dr. Frankenstein, who's the scientist. Yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. We're kind of Frankensteining our life. We're putting all of these parts together. I always say I love philosophies because I love to take their best parts and incorporate them into my life. It's kind of very Frankenstein of me to take parts from other people and put them together into myself. But that is what I like to do. I love to see good ideas from people and be like, that's a great idea. I'm going to incorporate that into my life. And my life has always improved because it's not just about us. Our introspection and self-awareness is a relationship with self. It is not coming from our egos. It's not saying I'm the only person who knows. I'm the smartest person in the room. Everyone else is silly and I'm the best. It's not that. It's actually saying the opposite. I'm a person having a biological experience. I need to be humbled. I need to stand on the shoulders of giants. I need to learn from others. And I need to really improve myself every day, all the time. And that improvement includes giving yourself time to rest, giving yourself time to breathe. You know, as a person myself who has had to learn that my identity wasn't wrapped in my job, or my identity wasn't wrapped in my money, or my identity wasn't wrapped in, I had to learn to make peace with the fact that I was so much more than the girl who worked all the time, or the girl that paid for things, or the girl who, you know, could whatever. I am so much more than these things. And the only person who's going to know that is you, because you spend the most time with you. So make sure that you deconstruct enough to put yourself back together. And this will, in my mind, protect you in all facets of life, including when people try to convince you otherwise of your character. You know who you are. So be honest with yourself during the deconstruction. And this is why I say do this in private, girls. Do this in private. This isn't about other people. Do it in private so you can be honest and face yourself. Because sometimes the things we realize about ourselves might feel embarrassing and you don't want to tell people. Don't. But tell yourself and then learn to move past that embarrassment. So make sure when you're deconstructing, you are facing all of yourself, every part of you, the parts you're embarrassed about, the parts that aren't so pretty. And if there's anything that is mortifying to you, offensive to you, shocking to you, anything that you're like, I don't want to be this version of me. I don't want it to take into the future. Get rid of it. Learn to let her go. Learn to put her in her place. You know, I always say thank you to past Brittany for being who she was, but I'm ready to be somebody new. And that version of me, you know, she's in me, but she is not she's not alive anymore in a sense. In a sense, like you kind of kill your past self in a very poetic sense and you emerge a different person. That's a real phenomenon. And if you don't think that's true, think about anybody you knew in high school who has not changed. Think about anybody from your small town or anybody back in where you grew up. Think about anyone you know on Facebook or whatever your social media website is. And just think like, oh yeah, that person has not changed since high school. That person's still living with their parents. That person is still at the same job. That person has not gotten any better. And just remember, that's somebody in the story, but I hope it's not you. Those people aren't bad, but they're not joyful either. And I would rather see you be joyful. So I hope the next time that I see you, the next time that I see anybody in my life, that they're a different person for the better. Because when we move towards our joy, we do grow. And that's the point of deconstruction, is to use it as a tool to grow. That's the whole idea around deconstructing society, right? We want to make society better by deconstructing it. Okay, start with yourself because the system reflects us as a whole. Your life is a reflection of what you've put into it. That's what karma is. Karma isn't you do good, you get good. Karma is just your life reflected back to you. So if you're unhappy, it's time to deconstruct. Okay, talk to you guys next time. Bye.
Stuck in my head, in real life I'm in bed. My belly's being fed and I'm okay. I'm just fine, yet all I do is whine. Not to you in my mind, cause I know I don't make sense. I've been nothing but blessed. So why's my life a mess? Please tell me, cause I'm sick of thinking. Yeah, I'm sick of reaching out for the truth and living life as a fool. Dun, da, da, da.